All right, we are live and on the air.
Can I see other people who are signed? Do I get to see who's signed up, or I don't get to see anybody, or is no one signed up?
I can show you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Elin. I'm here for Beth Novick's Government 3.0 class. Prior to the class, to do a presentation on fear in FISMA. And I think we're just getting set up on our Google Hangout.
We've got 7 people on.
Oh, we've got 7 people remotely who I don't seem to be able to see any of them. Why do I'm just seeing?
You can't see them. It's a one-way.
Oh, it's because I'm broadcasting. Okay. All right. So I will switch over. Switch over to the PowerPoint here. And we have about half an hour. The class starts at 5.
So you had
right? Okay. So to talk about fear in FISMA, as I think the blurb went out, I was previously at the Federal Communications Commission. It was my first time in government. I was there for about 4 years. My colleague, who may or may not be seen, is Matthew Burton, who was also in federal government for a number of years at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I want to say that, forgive me, I'm getting some feedback. Oh, yeah, I don't know. All right, now it seems to be gone. Nope, it's back.
Let me mute this one.
Yeah.
Maybe that. Yeah.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Test. That's better. Thank you. I would describe FISMA as it's a lot like taxes. Taxes are something big and complicated that we have to file every year with the federal government. And FISMA is a similar audit exercise that happens every year that has to do with technology in government. So FISMA stands for Federal Information Security Management Act, which was passed in 2002, I believe, 2001 or 2002. And like many things in government, frameworks, concepts, activities are actually named after the law that they represent. So people refer to the law as FISMA. They refer to the activities that you do every year as FISMA. They refer to the paperwork and guidelines as FISMA. I'm going to give a little brief story that I think represents FISMA. At the Federal Communication Commission, we wanted to do an updated website when Chairman Janikowski came in 2009. And the updated website was going to be hosted, quote, in the cloud, unquote, and it was going to be using the open source content management system Drupal, which I'm guessing a number of you might be familiar with. Now, so in order to use that website, we had to prepare a system security plan. I mean, that makes sense. If something goes wrong with the server, who should be contacted? How do you monitor to see if someone has gotten into the server or changed aspects of the website? How do you monitor that? So we have to put together, under FISMA, something called a system security plan. The system security plan for the Drupal website was over 350 pages long and was prepared by a security expert. In addition to preparing the system security plan, we were then able to get an authority to operate, which said that we were allowed to actually turn the website on in the cloud. Part of doing the documentation, the system security guide, is producing a POAM, plan of action and milestones. And essentially what that means is, now that you have a system security plan, what is your plan to fix the problems that you found when you were putting your system security plans together? And if you don't have all this paperwork, you're literally not supposed to launch your website or other technology service. So as a kind of framework. So FISMA basically breaks down into 6 steps. So every time in federal government you want to use a new technology service, every time you want to use a new tool like WordPress or MongoDB or something else, you are supposed to go through the FISMA framework to show that your use of the technology is secure. That framework has 6 steps. Those steps are, and I am going to read them here, categorize the system. Is this a system that has confidential information inside of it? Does it have social security numbers? What does the system do? Is it for, but I have to categorize the system. Once I've categorized the system or described it, I have to select the controls that are appropriate to that categorization of the system. Obviously, a system that is guarding nuclear codes needs a different set of controls than a system that is publishing the daily press release. So once we've selected our hundreds of controls that we're supposed to apply, we have to implement those controls. Since you've supposedly implemented the controls, you now have to assess whether or not you've implemented them correctly. Finally, if you've done all of that, you get a bunch of paperwork and you authorize the system. Having authorized the system, you have your plan of action and milestones to continue to monitor and fix anything that's wrong with it. And of course, then you moderate the system, you monitor the system, and you remediate. So these are the 6 steps that you have to go through every time you want to introduce new technology in government. I thought that this was pretty relevant for this class of looking for new solutions, because what this says is any solution you propose, if you want government to be a partner in using that technology, you are going to have to go through these steps with that system or the technology that you're producing, because government is required to go through these steps. So continuing our tour of the tip of the iceberg here, I want to describe basically how people, the way that people think about FISMA. FISMA describes along the top, you'll see potential impact. It's a way of thinking about if something goes wrong, what is the impact for that negative occurrence? So along the top, we basically see low, moderate, and high, right? So, and that's generally referred to in government lingo as FISMA low, FISMA moderate, and FISMA high. Oh, no worries. Is there a way for people to ask questions? Do they ask questions to you?
The people online can submit their questions via the chat, and then I will relay.
Right. So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time, and I can answer the questions.
You can also turn on screen sharing if you want the online folks to see the slides.
Oh, they're not seeing the slides right now?
They're seeing your face with the slides in the back.
Oh, really? Really? Oh, okay. Hold on for 1 second, folks.
So go back into the Hangout.
Yep.
And then just move this window over the controls over here. There we go. Yeah, screen share.
We're from the government. We don't know how this stuff.
Right, there's a 350-page manual. All right, let me just grab my desktop here, start screen share. We know how it works because Google Hangout has weird controls.
You can look here
okay.
and see what the online folks are seeing.
All right, there we go. Okay, so, all right, that's better. Okay, so it's still probably a little small for people to see on their screen, but you're seeing a table, and along the top, there's basically 3 categories, low, moderate, and high. I tend to think of low, moderate, and high as low, we're embarrassed and we have to issue some type of apology, and I get scolded. Moderate is people may get fired from their job, and your mission is, and your organization is now distracted from its work because it might be called before Congress. High is people die. You know, FISMA high, if something goes wrong with FISMA high, people die, stock markets tank, all sorts of things, right? Now, there are security objectives along the left, and they are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality, I have an IRS all of my taxes that I filed last year and all of my information, the confidentiality of that system is FISMA high. Because if someone was able to get inside of the IRS system, they would have access to all sorts of people's information. So that's high because the information is confidential. Integrity is the information accurate, right? Because we don't want someone to get to the census data, even though that's public, but we don't want someone to change the numbers that are being published or alter the numbers that are in the system. That's integrity of the data. And finally, there's availability of the information. There's lots of information that is not only public, it's really important that people can get to at the right time. And you can think of that in terms of, I think a good example is the monthly labor statistics. Before they're published, it's FISMA high because they're highly confidential numbers. And if you were to get access to those numbers early, it would have an adverse effect on the market. Once those numbers are public, it's FISMA high for availability, especially in the first few minutes when everyone is getting that information for the first time, and you have to give it out fairly to everybody, or people will be at a disadvantage. And the way it works when you categorize your system is you answer a series of questions along confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and if any one of, and whatever the highest level is, so if it's moderately important that the information is continuously available, then your system would be cloud. In the context of open government data, in the context of transparency, most systems are either FISMA low or they're FISMA medium because I'm really concerned with integrity or availability of information. There is a question in our room in our class.
So what if something is high on confidentiality, but then maybe low on integrity, and then high on availability? How do you rank that?
Whatever, you would rank it as high. So if it's whatever the highest level is of any of the three categories is what the entire system is. So if you look at it and you say, hey, I'm high on confidentiality, but I'm low on everything else, it would be FISMA high. And if there's even variability, it's whatever is the highest level, that is the system of controls that you want to implement. Now, very quickly, just for completeness, when people talk about controls, they're talking about three categories of controls. They're talking about logical controls associated with the software. They're talking about physical controls related to the facilities, and they're talking about people controls. So if you think about it, if my software is buggy and anybody can hack it, that's logical, right? But if my software is rock solid, but I have no locks on my door and anybody can walk in and call things up on the computer screen or turn the computers off, that would be a problem. So those are the facilities. And finally, it's great even if I have only 5 people having access to the system, if one of those individuals is a bad actor and a Chinese spy, then they would be able to, they would compromise the system. Do you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I do actually. Sort of two things. So this spreadsheet is sort of for both assessing and categorizing?
Correct. Yes. So the first phase is you have to assess how the system is being used in order to categorize it. So in the process of categorizing involves an assessment. There is a subsequent assessment that comes when after you have categorized everything, let me go back. After you've done the assessment to categorize it, do I have any social security numbers in this system? Is it really important to be confidential, et cetera? Once I've categorized it and I've implemented my controls, I have to assess whether the controls actually work, right? And you can think of that as I've got a smoke alarm in my house, but I've got to test the smoke alarm to make sure that the battery is charged and it's working. So that would be the assessment of the controls versus the assessment of the system for categorization. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. That's sort of my second question. So it's like a specific set of factors that result in a grade. For example, like I think of situations like in South Carolina, you have a lot of people whose social security numbers, right, were taken. Like, does that in the government in terms of their network security?
Matt's trying, so.
I don't think they get a grade. You mean?
Yes, I'm going to actually, we don't use the letter grades of A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, F. But conceptually, there is a sense of grading the system, right? So a system that you can think of the controls, and we'll look at some controls before we're done so that it'll make a little bit more sense. You can think of the controls as a number of criteria that the system should have in place, right? So one of the ones that we can look at is the idea that your password should expire after a certain amount of time, right? And the idea, if your password expires every 60 days, then there's less likelihood that someone will be able to get your password and be able to use it because every 60 days you change it. Versus if you keep the same password for 2 years, right? Another control is that all accounts have to have a password. You can't have an account that has no password, right? That's another type of control.
Just to feedback, when you're doing this, is this federally or is it across the board, federal and state?
FISMA refers to federal government only, Federal Information Security Management Act. So it refers only to federal. Within different industries, there are other compliance regimes or compliance frameworks. So within healthcare, help me on it. In healthcare, what is the healthcare? No, not healthcare.gov. Well, payment card industry or the banking industry has a number of controls, which are, the framework for that is known as PCI, for payment card industry, right? So they describe those controls. Salzbane-Oxley is for financial trading, is a framework there. And I'm forgetting for healthcare, but there's another frame. So there are different frameworks set in place. There is no national framework for cities and states. So municipalities don't have a framework prescribed by law because municipalities and states are their own government entities under our system. However, it's very likely that many states or municipalities would choose to borrow from the Federal Information Framework. Okay, so as we go along, we will. So I hope that. So are we making sense so far?
A quick request from the online folks: when you get a question from someone in person,
repeat the question.
Please.
Okay, I was going to ask whether they can hear that or not. All right. So here is this graphic here is a kind of visual representation of the steps that we were looking at earlier, and I will walk through what this looks like. The core idea is that you put together a security plan for your system. And if we look at the top, you'll see FIPS 199, FIPS 200, SP 853. These are different pieces of paperwork. The FIPS 199 and 200 have to do with answering a series of questions in order to properly categorize the system. So I'm going to move around clockwise. Once I've categorized the system, I'm going to select out of 400 different controls, 400 to 500 different controls, the applicable controls that are for my category of system. Those come from the SP 800-53. SP stands for Special Publication, and this is produced by NIST. So I look up my guidelines, I then configure my system, I then go through a certification and accreditation process, or CNA for short, and the certification accreditation process is where my controls are tested and assessed. I then produce my paperwork for my FISMA, and I've got my plan of action and my poems. I've got my poems, I've got my risk assessment, and I have my ongoing monitoring. So this cycle kind of repeats itself over and over again with every system. Okay, so that is the core introduction, and now we're going to do the quick demonstration. I'm going to give you guys a phone number here. So for this demo, I want you to text the word WordPress to this phone number. So you can text the word WordPress, or if you want, you can text the word DCAN. No. Sorry? No, really? What did they change it? Sorry?
Oh, you got it?
Yep. Okay, so what's happening in this demonstration, the project that I'm working on right now, funded by the Knight Foundation, is to lower the costs associated with doing FISMA and doing security compliance, particularly for open source and citizen-created technologies. And the demo that we're doing right here, I am spinning up for you a server in the cloud, either that has WordPress on it or DCAN. And the idea is to express that getting a server that has information on it that would help you go through the FISMA process. And so did you guys get your text back? Yeah. Right. If you're in this class and you grew up with you came of age with a cell phone in your hand, you're probably used to doing a lot of things with mobile devices. But if you're like me and you grew up with typewriters, and then it's very interesting that you really don't need to be at a computer to do a lot of work, and that between the cloud and a mobile device, you can get a lot done. And in this case, I see. So I think that people are getting it, and I'm going to, let's see if I can call up on my screen. Okay. So I see people are starting to get their servers. I'm going to bring one up here. What? Thank you. Okay. So I brought up a server that's just been launched. And in this, so I'm actually at a server that's been launched on Amazon. Each of you that sent in a text are getting your own server that'll be up for a few hours. It has WordPress installed on it. And in addition to WordPress, it has these pages that begin to describe information related to the government readiness of this application. I'm going to jump ahead to the development, operations, and security page, because in particular, and on this page, I'm displaying a little bit more information about the technical side of the computer. And in particular, I'm going to bring up the SCAP audit. Now, what you're looking at on the screen right now, this is the result of a vulnerability scan on the server. And you can basically see that this current server is only passing 55% of the different controls that are supposed to be in place for the configuration. So it's only past 90. It's only past 91. It's failed 109, and you can see the different ones that are here. So I'm looking. I think that this is an interesting one. Ensure that the log audit is located on a separate partition. What this really means is that my audit file is going to track what's happening on my computer. I want to make sure that that's on a different hard mounted than on the main hard disk, because I never want my audit file to fail for lack of room, right? So that's a very, oh, here's one, install virus scanning software. Maybe I want to have virus scanning software installed. This is a server, so that isn't going to be checked. But I'm going to have other things like, let's see. So I've got a number of them associated with the passwords. So when we were talking, for example, set the maximum password age. So the idea here is that passwords should expire after a certain amount of time. So we're running these different checks. I think what is relevant, as I said earlier, is that if you're creating a technology that you hope a government is going to use, or you want government to change a technology that they're using, the IT people are going to have to go through these steps. And if you're going into government or working with government, you're going to be exposed to these issues. And one of the plans for GovReady is that if you would go to the FISMA page, there would actually be guidance and topics and information here to guide you through getting this system into having its system security plan and going through the FISMA process. And it really covers the demonstration that I wanted to offer today. So if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes?
Because once you received the server, you said that it was Amazon. So what was the server? Was it Amazon that you were using, or was it something?
Right. The question was that the text messages said, I'm setting up your server, and I mentioned that the servers are being set up on Amazon. And the question is what we're looking at on my screen right now, is that actually Amazon or is that something else? And the answer is, what we're looking at on my screen is a server that's running in the Amazon cloud. Right? So we are looking at a server, and all of you should have these exact same pages if you sent a text message. Each of you have your own separate server that's running in the cloud. It's an entire server. And it is running on Amazon. What we were looking at a moment ago is a security scan that I ran on the server while the server was getting set up. Right? So this is this is a technical report. This is what the system that the Chief Information Security Officer or the CIO might look at to see whether or not my system is configured securely. So this is a more geeky report. And I think one of the challenges right now is that the entrepreneurs and the innovators are not exposed to these kind of reports that the security people and the CIOs care a lot about. And so what happens is you say, well, I need the security people to test it. And the security people come back and say there are problems. And that's a black box. And there's an opportunity, though, to, especially if we work in the cloud, to pre-configure our servers so that they have all this information. We can make this information friendlier, and we can all be on the same page from the moment the server is first set up. And just to, and as I said, this is actually a WordPress server. So if I were to go over to WordPress, here is the WordPress setup screen, so I could set up WordPress on this server.
And another thing is, let me know if I'm going to talk sort of this direction. Just to add to that, so WordPress is an open source product. A lot of a lot of entities out there that are responsible for managing open source products will just stare at you blankly if you talk to them about FISMA. A company like Microsoft understands this, and their business depends on it. So I mean, you can bet that if you run that sort of scan on a Windows system, it's going to pass, because Microsoft knows how to configure their systems in compliance with federal guidelines. But if you're WordPress or you're Drupal, you're not used to working with the government. And if you're a government information security officer, this isn't something that you're used to using, and you don't really know where to start, where to begin running, where to begin validating this new piece of software against the guidelines. And this is sort of like just a very quick way of doing that.
Right. So I think that one of the reasons we're seeing slow modernization of IT and slow adoption of open source is that the providers of open source tools and cloud-based tools don't understand how to provide information to government in a way that the government IT administrators can successfully use, as Matt was just describing. So we hope to be able to change that, and I think that kind of, thank you very much for the opportunity to do this demo. I think it wraps it up. If you have any questions, feel free to reply to that text message, or you can send me a tweet at Greg Elin, and the website is govready.org. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, the reason for this demo, it's not obvious, it makes sense, and the implications of what they're saying, like, it's relatively technical, right? So I'm curious if it's translating into, like, what that really means from a strategy or policy perspective. Or you're kind of like, what? I'm not sure what that was.
I think I get the importance of it, and based on what you said, my question in my head is, why is it that Microsoft is one of the only organizations that has access to this, and what are you going to do to maybe help share this more broadly so that more people are using it? Because it is an important tool just based on what you're saying as far as security, but what type of
Right. Right. I think that's a very good, succinct statement, which is one of the reasons that Microsoft, why government always seems to use Microsoft or Oracle or these big tools and never seems to use these cheaper, lighter weight alternatives, is that the big providers understand the security implications and they understand how to provide the information necessary for FISMA. They know how to do the taxes, while the lighter weight companies are not providing information on how to do FISMA. So the individuals responsible for network security have to operate under the law that's FISMA, and they can't use these other tools because the other tools don't provide the information. And we hope through GovReady to start to change that, to educate people and make it easier for the lighter weight technologies to provide the same complex information to government that Microsoft and Oracle provides.
Microsoft doesn't have special access. They just have the resources to focus on that
right.
stuff. And they've got decades of enterprise experience. So, you know, if you're using a government computer, you turn it on and it says, hey, I'm installing updates. And I'm going to restart your computer for you in 2 hours if you don't click this button here. That's because Microsoft has the infrastructure to deploy those patches automatically. There's a security issue, they patch it, and then it automatically goes out to every user. If you're using Drupal, I mean, they're used to working with, you know, open source coders who are just spinning up websites for the general public, not for an enterprise. So to them, it's just a totally different customer. They've never had to comply with these rules.
And the last word I'll say is, when you are in the role of an administrator and you're trying to manage 2,000 desktop computers or 300 servers, your priorities immediately change. When you're an innovator who cares about getting one new tool in, you can't understand why people aren't willing to try this. But when you're trying to figure out how to manage 200 servers and do the annual taxes and audit for each of those servers, your priorities immediately shift to what makes it easy for me to manage 200, not what makes it easy for me to try something new.
And the thing that guarantees or that tries to ensure compliance with all these rules is an annual audit. In fact, I mean, I had 3 auditors. I had my own inspector general, I had OMB at the White House, and I had Congress's GAO. And each one of them comes to you and says, hey, show me all your documentation. Show me how you're managing all this stuff.
For every system.
Every BlackBerry, every printer, everything. Show me the code for this application. How does it change it on this date? What does that do?
Oh, and we're going to do an in-depth dive on 3 of these systems. We're going to do a really in-depth dive where we look at all of your controls and make sure you have all the controls in place. But we're not going to tell you which system until it's time. And we're done.
And then we're
So
going
thank
to
you.
publish a report holding you for anything that's broken. So that's why if you're the information security guy, you want this thing to be buttoned up. And if someone tells you, oh, I want to install the software, it's managed by volunteers, what are you talking about? No way.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.